This book is dedicated to Adam. You were right. Pizza is my passion. The syntactical nature of reality, the real secret of magic, is that the world is made of words. And if you know the words that the world is made of, you can make of it whatever you wish. Terence McKenna. From the earliest times the old have rubbed it into the young that they are wiser than they, and before the young had discovered what nonsense this was, they were old too, and it profited them to carry on the imposture. W. Somerset. Mom. Decency and integrity are fancy words, but they never kept anybody well fed. And I've got quite an appetite. Howard Duff, Shakedown. Fulcrum. By Jason Allen Patterson. Part 1. Strange Bedfellows. Chapter 1. 1. A dark, Ohio sky fanned out into oblivion. Black and sprawling it swallowed the horizon. Tatters of clouds floated by on nothing, momentarily obscuring frozen flickers of stars before trailing away to God knew where. The eternal, waiting silence was shattered into a frenzy when a burnt red Buick Century from a mythical and forgotten time whisked past at better than 60 miles an hour, kicking up road fossils behind its rotting bumper into flurries of dust and specks of pebbles. Make America Great Again stickers flanked either side of two ancient taillights that peered out maliciously into the bitter January air. The coiled image of a snake performed a sacred dance as it tried to pull itself away from an aged decal that warned, "Don't tread on me," beside the car's smoking hole of exhaust pipe. Ed Barrington sat expansively atop a faded leather throne, with one meaty hand slumped over his steering wheel. Relics of discarded Cheeto bags and Slim Jim wrappers decorated the Buick's interior like crudely fashioned Christmas ornaments. Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie stared lifelessly from a wrinkled magazine cover beside him on the passenger seat. He was going to clean the goddamned thing out tomorrow. He had meant to do it at lunchtime, planning to use his gift of 45 minutes allotted to him by the Little Pencil Dick night supervisor. The guy took a kind of smug pleasure in reminding Ed and his crew that a minute is like a drop of water, in response to any futile pleas for pardon, upon returning to the floor from a late break. That had been the plan anyway, until that wallowing bag of shit gas, Don Jenkins, had talked Ed's fucking ear off for the better half of 20 minutes. Ed had tried to be patient with him, nodding and smiling in all the right places and miming all the right facial expressions, but it hadn't hurried things along at all. Don's wife had just died of an accidental step-stool fall, not yet 3 months prior, so Ed figured his usual closer, like slapping him on the goodbye shoulder, or dropping one of his many masterful quips about pussy or foreigners before walking off to his car, would have been a little mean. He had almost dodged him, but Don had seen Ed swiping his badge at the front door a millisecond before he could slip out. The poor son of a bitch was tired and suffering. His small, gray eyes had scanned Ed's face for traces of hope, or something he could hold on to in the typhoon of grief that had jerked him up out of his life, and everything he thought he understood about it. "I think she's still in the house, Eddie," Don had said, ducking away self-consciously to avoid obstructing a swarm of stiff assholes in power suits on its path to the visitors' parking lot. I know how fucked that sounds, but I'm not kiddin' ya, there's been some eerie shit and goings-on and stuff I just can't explain, you know. Like the other night. I'm sitting in her old easy chair, playing footsie with muffins, when I hear somebody whisperin' in my fucking ear. My balls felt like they were trying to hide in my throat. I wheeled around, expecting to see her standing there the way she used to with that "just what are you up to now" Don look on her face. But nobody was standin' there. I scared the cat shit out of muffins when I jumped. She tore a fucking hole right out of the side of my ankle. The bad one too. He peeled one side of a dingy sock down to his boot laces. A ragged pink hole festered beneath. Ed winced. "Christ, Don, you feeding a lion in that shithouse? That looks infec." "Last night I saw her, Eddie," Don had said, weakly. His voice had taken on a low, watery quality. Tears threatened to spill over his baggy eyelids from behind a pair of fogged-up safety goggles. Ed had tried to keep his poker face, but something in Don's expression had startled him a little. It was like looking at a corpse. He thought Don might be joining Mary before next Christmas rolled into town. I was in the shower, trying to wash out all that fucking axle grease I got in my hair when I cracked my bean on the press Wednesday night. When the shampoo was good and lathered into my scalp, and I closed my eyes, I felt wind on my back. I tried to open 'em up even though they was burnin' from the soap, and I saw something move. The curtain had been pulled back a little, and there she was, standing across the hall about 20 feet away, and looking right at me. But she looked, I don't know, different. Ed's forehead flexed into ribbons of sallow flesh. Different, he allowed, flatly. That look had passed over Don's face again. He said to no one over Ed's right shoulder. She looked worried, I think, or lost. Like she couldn't find her car in a parking lot or something. I shut my eyes again, washed the sting out, and when I opened 'em back up, she wasn't standin' there no more. But I seen her left foot, just before it stepped behind the bathroom wall, and into the living room, her hair bouncin' off her shoulders, and that old ripped-up nightgown she used to wear was wavin' behind her. I stepped out of the shower, wrapped a towel around myself and slopped out into the living room. Mary? I said, Mary? That you? But nobody was out there, and she didn't answer me. Because she's dead. She's dead, Eddie. Jesus. What am I gonna do? Ed didn't know. But he had known it was damn near 6:30, and his time for refreshing the Buick during his second shift lunch break had come and gone. That had really pissed him off because that meant the time for eating anything had also come and gone during Don's fucking therapy session. Maybe you oughta start drinking from a different bottle, Don, Ed had said, haughtily, in his thickest Long Island dialect. And get some sleep. He had patted him on his balding pate like a loving master comforting an obedient dog, and started toward the glistening sea of automobiles, where the Buick sat, obtrusively. Love you too, Eddie, Don had said to himself. 2. It turned out that Ed would miss his chance to find food, or do anything else, for that matter except fumble with the goddamn radio, and watch Rick the roaming security guard argue with the Dot Steel Company driver about chalking his 18-wheeler. If Ed had even tried leaving the parking lot, he would have been absorbed into the broken line of lunch paraders who had had the same idea, so there hadn't been much choice. Now he sat with his stomach cramping in little tugs, watching the yellow lines of the bypass melting by in a rhythmic blur, homeward bound, in a dirty fucking Buick. Fucking Don. Ed hadn't even had the chance to snatch a candy bar out of the vending machine on his way back and through the shipping doors. Don had cost him that too. A minute is like a drop of water, he had thought. But it had all been just as right as the rain, for what he cared. Ed was at the gates of a 4-day weekend vacation, and not even Don Jenkins could have riled him. He passed a fleeting string of closed fast food restaurants, their dark windows ominous and watchful. The dashboard clock turned over to 10 o'clock. Ed brought the Buick to a lumbering crawl and turned down Old Carver Road in hopes of catching a desolate 24-hour donut shop or some nocturnal hole-in-the-wall bar. He hated this side of town. It was too fucking spread out, nothing but abandoned parking lots peppered with weeds, and the faded ghosts of long-dead billboard advertisements evanescing into mercantile obscurity. Ed stayed away from here as much as he could help it, but tonight he couldn't. He had to eat. And the west side was sleeping for the night. He drove on for a few more miles, his headlights reaching out into the immaculate darkness. After 15 more minutes of potholes and leaning power lines, nothing had turned up. The mission, it seemed, had come to a bust. If he went any farther, he would be risking an unfortunate tour through the outskirts of middle-class civilization. He wasn't that hungry, for Christ's sake. Luckily for Ed and Don, for that matter, the long-winded asshole really would have heard about it if Ed hadn't just so happened to snack shop in a UDF he had wandered into when he couldn't hold his piss on his way home last night. he had an emergency stash of ramen rations to disappoint him, at home. He sped up to plunge through the last intersection, before the back road to the interstate reached out to his right, but the lonely traffic light, that was swaying back and forth 200 feet, or so ahead of him winked from yellow to red. The Buick's tires slowed to a whisper. Ed sat in silence, surveying another empty parking lot with another set of orphaned office buildings, and spotting no signs of life. He looked to his left, bored and exasperated, and then brightened at what he saw. A rectangle of strip mall sat askew with the road, half tucked in a shaggy growth of woods. He hadn't noticed it when he had come over the dip in the hill. Crooked patches of fluorescent light were plastered on the cold concrete in front of moist panes of glass that connected the building's bottom to its top. Ed watched the little neon sign that was hanging on the doorpost, open, on and off in intermittent bursts. A flamboyant banner was barely visible from his point of view. It boasted conspicuously above the door's frame in checkered reds and greens. "Pizza," Ed said to himself. The mechanical dreidel dangling in front of the Buick blinked to green, and Ed swirled the steel hulk into a U-turn. It groaned in protest. 3. Ed stepped into the welcomed warmth of the parlor's lobby. Fragrant phantoms made of parsley and toasted yeast enveloped his face. God knew he had eaten plenty of cheap pizza in his 62 years of life, so Ed knew when he was smelling the good shit. A wooden maitre d' was smiling at him with inert exhilaration. It stood frozen in front of a stainless steel countertop that helmed the ship of a miniature kitchen. A stone brick oven was aglow in an angry red aura that was leaking from its false brimstone facade. The air shimmered and distorted around its thick, metal door. A small, glass porthole revealed a wheel of dough and cheese as it bubbled and writhed in its 500-degree tomb. Ed scanned the menu that was dangling from the ceiling on 2 wires. The words and prices were carefully written in chalk like an artifact from some 50s diner. He didn't see anyone tending the register, or anyone scurrying about in the kitchen. "Hello?" he called over the stubborn hum of the pizza oven. No answer. He frisked his back pocket for the reassuring lump that was supposed to be there, before remembering his wallet was still in the car, once his hand brushed against deflated fabric. He connected with the door and caught a whiff of icy vapor when a voice stopped him mid-stride. "Leaving so soon?" it asked, floating across to him on the parlor's electric noise. Ed turned to face the voice's owner. A portly man, soon to part with his 50s, stood regarding him from behind a set of thin horn-rimmed spectacles. He flashed Ed a warm smile, wringing his hands absently in and out of a white towel rag that bloomed from his left pocket. Ed laughed. "Nope," he said, "but unless you're running a shelter here, I'm gonna need my wallet. I still got enough time to put in for a delivery tonight, pal? My house is about 20 minutes away from here, but I don't need it till 11. That work?" Ed was hungry, but the O'Reilly Factor didn't rerun on Fox for another 45 minutes. That was too long to wait if he didn't want to eat it cold. Plus, he still had to shower and wash the stink of the work week out. Relishing his extended leave of absence from the auto plant had its ceremony. "Oh indeed, mister?" the portly man said, trailing off politely so Ed could give up his name. "It's Barrington. Ed Barrington. We deliver up through the witching hour, Mr. Barrington." He snatched a plain white sheet of paper from a small notepad and scribbled Ed's name in big, scrawling arcs. "We're something of a hit here with the college kids," he said. "I'm not sure anyone would be able to graduate again if I ever shut these doors. Pizza, beer, and studying after midnight are sacred rites of academic passage. Wouldn't you say, Mr. Barrington?" Ed chuffed. He didn't give fuck one for college kids. And he certainly didn't give a shit about another rite of passage. That's all he ever heard about anymore. These millennial brats had the whole fucking world handed to them on a pocket-sized electronic platter, and they still found shit to complain about. The goddamned things could put in a call to China, snap your picture, do your taxes, film the family Christmas, and then show you Kim Kardashian's oiled-up tits, for good measure. Wasn't that enough? They don't know how good they got it, Ed agreed. The portly man smiled, amicably. I'll take a large double pepperoni and mushroom pie. Ed told him. I live over on the west side. It's right off the buckle in the Beltway. 11934, Alexander Hoyt Drive. You familiar? The man ignored his question. He scribbled Ed's address in that same sprawling script underneath the name he had written. I'm familiar, he said. My driver knows that area quite well, in fact. Driver? Ed interjected. One guy? And he delivers all those presents in one night? You got Santa Claus workin' in here or something? The portly man stared down at his writing hand, leaving Ed to bask in his own snark, as if he had heard that joke 5 times before breakfast. Now, he was slashing tiny checkmarks into empty boxes next to a laundry list of ingredients. He knows the terrain, he's been here for 2.5 years, he said, absently. He struck at the card with his pen one last time, and then fastened it to a steel clip harness, before sending it into a glide down a rusted zip line with one quick snap of his wrist. It collided with the bolt attaching the line to the far wall encasing the miniature kitchen. He met Ed's gaze after they both watched the order card snap violently into place. The smile returned to his smooth face. He wants to go to college someday. He told Edition this place gets him by for now. He rides around town, all night, listening to books on his stereo. Smart boy. It's hard out there on these poor kids nowadays. The debt, you know. It's breaking them. We came of age in a kindertime, didn't we, Mr. Barrington? He dropped his eyes to the white rag he was wringing between his hands again, and flashed Ed a pained look of solemnity. We held the party and I guess they're holding the bill, he said. Ed rolled his eyes to the ceiling. He didn't like this guy. There was something about him. He couldn't quite pinpoint just what, but he knew when he was being patronized. Well, I don't know where the hell the party was, but I know I'm still paying the bill, Ed said, shifting his eyes back to the man. And I'll still be paying it for 2 more summers. Then, it's somebody else's problem. 35 years is a long goddamn time. Well, I'm sure these millennial brats would sleep better at night if they knew how soon your suffering will be coming to an end, the portly man said. I bet it would give them lots of hope to know there's an economic afterlife out there, once you pass through those shimmering golden year gates. Ed smirked. That's funny, he said, because it'd be a small wonder if they could pull their heads out of their asses long enough to think about the next day, let alone the golden years. The portly man nodded. He smiled pleasantly, but Ed saw a flicker of disdain ripple across his face. Touché, he said, bowing his head in good sportsmanship. It's better that way though, isn't it? I think you're probably onto something there, Mr. Barrington. I call it the ostrich effect. Do you know why an ostrich buries its head in sand? Ed shrugged. The portly man nodded again, as if he had expected nothing more. They don't, he said, simply. The car salesman's smile faded, and his face set. It turns out that the whole thing is nothing but a spurious wives' tale, Mr. Barrington. An ostrich isn't really hiding when you can't see its head. What it's really doing is poking its neck down into a dark hole, so it can turn the eggs it has laid for safekeeping. I'm guessing it becomes instinct after a while, after you see enough of them crushed under some guy's work boot. Ed shook his head and pointed down at his feet. Work boots, he said, built those colleges that come up with all of your fancy analogies. I don't remember seeing condescending lectures on your menu. What do I owe ya? I got shit to do. The portly man touched the back of a hand to his forehead, feigning concern. Oh my gosh, he said, I have a big mouth, don't I? I hope you'll excuse my abrasive carelessness. You could say I'm passionate about this box of subject matter, Mr. Barrington. I meant no disrespect. And I certainly wasn't trying to diminish your great sacrifice. Ed measured him carefully. A small ember of anger was beginning to smolder unevenly behind his eyes. If he didn't get out of this place soon, this little back and forth was going to end up leading somewhere neither one of them wanted to go. You got it, pizza man. Listen, I'm gonna let you get back to whatever it is you do. He motioned to the oven with a quick jerk of his head. What's the damage? The pizza man nodded affably and chuckled to himself. What I do, he mused. 11 big ones. Ed nodded, expressionlessly, and turned to the double glass doors to fetch his wallet, again. But when he shoved his hand into his pocket to feel for the hard ring of Buick keys, his knuckles brushed against two soft slips of paper. He pulled them out, shaking his head, slightly bemused at what he saw. A washed-out $10 bill, and a stiff, newborn baby George Washington. He frowned in a distracted sort of way. How did, and then his face smoothed out again when memory served. He smiled. Fucking Don. Ed had slipped the bills into his pocket on the way back from the plant's gargantuan parking lot, after realizing Don had used up the lion's share of his lunch break. Had he actually made it back to the E-Wing's little makeshift break room in time, the Campbell's vending machine would have more than satisfied Ed on $11. And the fucking meatloaf of a wallet had been digging into his ass cheek all day, so he had tossed it into the glove box and taken the money. He laughed. What was his pot-smoking, hippie son of a bitch nephew always talking about? Ed couldn't remember, but he thought it might have been the name of some old Police song. Something about coincidence. He tried one last time to pull it up from the dark lock of memories that writhed in his brain, but it wouldn't come to him. You ever notice, Ed started to ask, and then broke off when he turned around and realized he was by himself again. He dropped the 10 and the single onto the polished chrome countertop and strolled back out the way he had come in, grimacing against the cold. The Buick slept crookedly underneath a parking lot light that buzzed and strobed with feeble electricity. Ed turned one last time to survey the mostly vacant strip mall. Dark, empty rooms sat behind plate glass windows, their gypsy businesses having packed up and moved away. Housing pillars with empty socket outlets peered out at him, blindly. Clumsy rows of cardboard boxes that had been left behind in transitive haste rested like tombstones in the moonlight crawling underneath the gaps of the faceless glass doors. A blanket of undisturbed dust coated about 10,000 square feet of linoleum flooring that sat useless and abandoned. The pizza parlor was the only manifestation of purpose in sight. It beamed all the way out to the road like a faithful lighthouse on a nighttime shoreline. Ed reached his car and collapsed behind the wheel with a labored grunt. He was about 15 minutes from home now. That was plenty of time to beat the pizza guy back and shower. He didn't see a single cop camping out on any of the medians on the way out here, so the road was, most likely, open for business. He swiped the traveling flask of bourbon from underneath his seat and stole a liberal gulp. My great sacrifice, he said to the windshield, with whimsical sarcasm. And then the Buick roared back to life. It lurched forward and drifted to the lot's exit, bouncing buoyantly over the curb. Kale sent exhaust blatt into the air, and it eventually disappeared back over the hill it had come from. The secluded strip mall stayed behind in the dark. Chapter 2.